The wind whispered through the endless forests of the Mohawk Valley, carrying with it a chill that spoke of blood yet to be shed. It was the summer of 1777, and the fate of the American Revolution hung not only on grand armies and celebrated generals, but on a lonely wooden outpost called Fort Stanwix. Few at the time could have imagined that this obscure stronghold, perched at a vital crossroads in the New York wilderness, would become the stage for one of the most harrowing and heroic episodes of the war. Historian John Lusiter wrote in Saratoga, "A military history of the decisive campaign of the American Revolution." The siege of Fort Stanwix stands as a testament to the endurance of a garrison that refused to yield even when the wilderness itself conspired with their enemies. And that is exactly what we are about to uncover, a story of desperation, deception, and defiance that would echo through history. Before we dive deeper, picture this. The British High Command in 1777 devised a masterstroke to crush the rebellion by severing New England from the rest of the colonies. This was Burgoyne's grand plan, a three-pronged attack converging on Albany with General Howe pushing north from New York City, Burgoyne descending from Canada, and a smaller force under Colonel Barry St. Leger striking from the west through the Mohawk Valley. The strategy, as described by historian Richard Ketchum in Saratoga, turning point of America's Revolutionary War, was elegant in conception, catastrophic in execution. Why? Because plans rarely survive the wilderness and the American spirit. St. Leger's mission was clear: seize control of the Mohawk corridor, rally loyalists, and unleash fear through the frontier. To do this, he brought a mixed force of nearly 2,000, British regulars, Hessian mercenaries, Loyalist rangers, and hundreds of Iroquois warriors led by Joseph Brant, Thayendanegea, the fearsome Mohawk war chief whose very name sent shivers through patriot hearts. Opposing them? A garrison of barely 750 Continentals and militia under Colonel Peter Gansevoort, a man young in years but iron in resolve. Their fortress, Fort Stanwix, renamed Fort Schuyler by the Patriots, sat astride the Oneida Carry, the key portage between the Mohawk River and Wood Creek, a lifeline to the Great Lakes. Control this fort, and St. Leger could slice deep into New York, threatening the Hudson and linking with Burgoyne's column. The siege began on August 2, 1777, under a sky bruised with summer storms. St. Leger's artillery roared, hurling shot against the log walls as plumes of smoke curled skyward. War cries of the Iroquois rippled through the forests, a chorus of dread meant to unnerve as much as to kill. "It was terror distilled into sound," notes Gavin Watt in The Burning of the Valleys. Inside the fort, fear was a constant companion, but so too was defiance. Gansevoort's men, farmers, mechanics, and raw recruits, patched breaches under fire, doused flames sparked by British shells, and returned volley for volley. Their world shrank to the confines of timber walls, their days measured by the thud of cannonballs and the whistle of musket fire. As supplies dwindled, hunger gnawed at their bellies, and foul water brought disease. The heat was oppressive. Mosquitoes rose in clouds from the swamps, stinging exposed flesh until the men's arms were raw. Sleep came in fits, broken by sudden alarms as shadows flitted at the edge of torchlight. Yet surrender was unthinkable. To capitulate meant death, swift and merciless, at the hands of Brant's warriors. British threats dripped with menace. If the fort did not yield, every soul would be delivered to the vengeance of the savages. Gansevoort's reply was blunt, unadorned, and unyielding. They would defend the fort to the last man. Historian Don Higginbotham observed in the War of American Independence, "It was the language of defiance uttered by men who knew no mercy awaited the weak." But outside those walls, events took a darker turn. Brigadier General Nicholas Herkimer, leading nearly 800 Mohawk Valley militia to relieve the fort, marched into a nightmare. On August 6, in a tangled ravine near Oriskany Creek, His column fell into a British ambush. What followed was one of the bloodiest encounters of the war, an orgy of violence fought at arm-ass length. Muskets flared, smoke billowed beneath the forest canopy, and the air quivered with screams. When powder was spent, men closed with knives, bayonets, and tomahawks, hacking and plunging in a chaos so intimate it defies imagination. "It was a slaughter without quarter," wrote Alan Eckert in The Wilderness War. Herkimer himself, gravely wounded, refused evacuation. Propped against a tree, his leg shattered, he calmly lit his pipe and directed the fight as blood pooled at his feet. The battle at Oriskany was a Pyrrhic victory for St. Leger's forces. Though Herkimer's column was mauled, British and Indian casualties mounted alarmingly. Worse for St. Leger, the carnage poisoned his alliance with the Iroquois. They had come for swift triumph and plunder, not grinding losses. Their restlessness deepened when Gansevoort, far from cowering, struck back. In a daring sortie, a detachment from the fort slipped into the night, fell upon the enemy's camps, burned tents, spiked guns, and vanished into the trees. The raid sowed chaos and humiliation, emboldening the garrison and eroding the enemy's confidence. "It was audacity raised to an art," wrote historian Christopher Hibbert. Yet even audacity has limits. Days dragged on, and the fort's plight worsened. Then fate, wearing the face of Benedict Arnold, strode onto the stage. At this moment in history, Arnold was a name of glory, not infamy. A commander famed for boldness and brilliance. He marched from the east with a scratch force of barely 700, far too few for a frontal assault. But Arnold's weapon was not steel, it was cunning. He captured a half-mad loyalist named Han Joost Schuyler and turned him into the centerpiece of an elaborate deception. Schuyler, gaunt and wild-eyed, was sent racing into St. Leger's camp with tales of an American army vast beyond counting, its bayonets glittering like a river of doom. Arnold's Oneida allies fanned the same rumors, their voices low and ominous. Fear metastasized like a contagion. The Iroquois, already sullen, began melting away. British officers quarreled, discipline frayed, and panic gripped the ranks. On August 22nd, the unraveling became complete. St. Leger, his nerves shattered, ordered a retreat that degenerated into rout. They abandoned everything: cannon, tents, provisions, even their sick and wounded. It was flight through the wilderness, harried by pursuit, leaving behind a trail of wreckage and shame. St. Leger's campaign ended not with a bang, but with a whimper, observed John Furling in Almost a Miracle. It was undone not by force of arms, but by the ghosts of an army conjured by Arnold's genius. Inside Fort Stanwix, jubilation erupted. The enemy was gone, the siege lifted. Against all odds, this battered outpost had defied an empire. Its stand was more than a tactical victory. It was a strategic ripple that swelled into a wave. By halting St. Leger's thrust, Stanwix doomed Burgoyne's grand plan. Weeks later, at Saratoga, Burgoyne's army would lay down its arms, a capitulation that drew France into the war and turned rebellion into revolution. Without Stanwix, Christopher Ward wrote in The War of the Revolution, there might have been no Saratoga, and without Saratoga, no American nation. So remember this: the destiny of a continent once teetered on the log walls of a fort few had heard of. Here, amid the stench of powder and the whisper of pines, men starved, bled, and endured for an idea larger than themselves. Their story is a hymn to resolve, a declaration that liberty is bought dear and paid for in mud, smoke, and unmarked graves on the edge of the world. Before we close, take a moment, subscribe, ring that bell, and keep the flame of history alive, because stories like this deserve to be told, not as dusty footnotes, but as living fire. Join us next time as we unearth more forgotten battles where courage stood against chaos and the future hung by a thread. For this was not merely a siege, It was a crucible of character, a frontier apocalypse, and a triumph of will over terror. Fort Stanwix stands in silence now, but if you listen closely, the wind still carries the echo of defiance, the whisper of men who chose to fight, and in so doing, carved freedom from the jaws of empire.